Yappa. Don't know what to do. This is becoming a regular occurrence, apparently. Um, it's supposed to be introducing people to all sorts of things, but there's just so much. Don't really know where to get started. So many facets of this franchise I'm supposed to chronicle, apparently, according to myself, this self inflicted punishment. But we could find something new to introduce with each time. Welcome, everyone, to Don't Know What to Do, your favorite Rama One Half podcast. I'm sure you've discovered several since previously listening to this, but this is still your favorite. I'm your host, Elena slash Edgy, depending on your level of familiarity with me. And joining me, we have yet another guest. Say hello.
Hi, I'm Rocia.
Hey, what is your level of familiarity with Ranma One Half?
I have watched a decent amount of Ranma. I'm not like an expert, but I've seen a decent handful of episodes. I've never read the manga or seen any of the very extensive supplementary material that seems to exist, but I've seen a good amount of episodes.
Funny enough, the amount of supplementary material is not too extensive. It's mostly just the actual main material that is rather extensive.
True.
Although I suppose most people wouldn't expect there to be 14 Ranma One Half video games.
Yeah, that's really mainly what I was referring to.
Yeah, so that is what you have selected from my bountiful list of Ranma One Half media to educate people on. Is there like, how do I put this? There's a lot to cover from just the video games alone. Some of them are like full-length RPGs that I could probably do a whole episode on. So like to like maybe narrow it down, I've got a couple of ideas of what would be the best to start with, but like what do you think of when you hear like Rama One Half video game? What are you expecting to learn about today?
So like knowing what was like common in anime adaptations at the time, I would expect like kind of a cheap fighting game or RPGs existing is not too surprising because there were a number of Dragon Ball RPGs around that time. Uh, like I don't know how you translate a very gag focused kind of slice of lifey at times series like Ranma into a video game without it feeling just kind of a little weird, but I guess that's what I'm going to find out.
Yeah, and definitely there are multiple fighting games, and even games that aren't fighting games try to incorporate some element of like combat. There's multiple adventure games, and there isn't a single one of them that's just text. There's always like some attempt to at least have some sort of combat mini game at least.
Okay, all right.
Which is interesting because like they seem to understand that like, well, this is about martial arts and that's maybe the easiest thing to turn into something interactive, but also
Right.
this is a very like gag heavy series. This is, martial, it's not really a martial arts story. It's a mix of a number of things, but there's definitely easy to make a roster of fighting game characters at least. If y- People have made fighting games out of weirder rosters, if you could make a fighting game based on the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy on the PS2, you could definitely make something based on the Ranma cast.
True, true.
So I have selected then three games that I think would be a good starting point for a number of reasons. The first is they basically cover the variety of genres that Ranma games encompass. I got one that's like a sort of fighting game, one that's like a sort of adventure game, and another one that's like weird. That's the genre I put it as, weird.
Okay, all right.
And I also picked these three because they are all, well, or at least include adaptations of the same story from the manga. So we
Oh,
have a comparison point between the three of them.
okay.
Uh, not every Ranma one half game has an original story, which is expected from a lot of anime video games,
Right.
especially stuff like, say, the fighting games. If they even have a story at all, you can expect to just be like, well, here's the characters, here's the ones you fight. Remember the time they fought this guy? Well, he's the final boss. Very typical stuff like that. Um, but I notice that the ones that do make like direct adaptations of the source material tend to focus on this one story, which I found fascinating. It it makes sense when you think about it. This is a good story to adapt into a video game format. It's just interesting. It's not a lot, but it is weird that I now have three nickels based on the Ultimate Weakness Moxibustion arc.
mm.
Are you familiar with that storyline?
Vaguely. It's been a while, but I know what you're referring to.
Yeah. So I suppose for the sake of the audience, it would be good to sort of recap this story because all three of these video games reference it at least in some way. Some of them are full adaptations of it, whereas others are only just partial adaptations. But generally, what's been referred to as the Ultimate Weakness Moxibustion arc is in reference to the time where Ranma is attacked by Haplsai with a specific technique, the ultimate weakness moxibustion technique.
Yeah.
For anyone unaware, moxibustion is like a type of Chinese medicine. It has some overlap with like acupuncture, but it's more about like burning these like herbal paste or something on top of your skin. I'm not a doctor, but one of the first reasons I think this is a good adaptation is because, well, first of all, this is like the biggest arc up to that point
Right.
in the manga. Prior to that, like the longest arcs were like maybe 6 or 7 chapters long. Which, especially back then when manga were way quicker and punchier, like you could get a lot done in 7 chapters.
Right.
Yeah. This arc was like 12 chapters, like almost twice as long as the longest arcs before that. So this is like a proper, like, no, this is a big moment. This is, I think, the only storyline from the manga to become a three-parter in the anime adaptation rather than just a two-parter. It
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
it's a chunky arc, and it is even like conveniently split into 3 acts, which was good for adapting it into 3 episodes, and also good for like video game pacing purposes as
Right.
well.
Right.
And I think the most important thing about it is that it is entirely based on characters that are already introduced. This isn't like, say, the Pantyhose Taro arc where a new villain shows up and he's the main problem and they defeat him and he's gone. This is like, no, you know the cast. Now here's a storyline involving this cast that you're already familiar with. So
Hmm.
there's no need to introduce anyone, and I think that makes it easier to just adapt into a video game format of here's all the Ranma characters, do the video game version of that.
Right.
And finally, I think the other reason this makes for a good adaptation is that the main villain is Haposai, the creepy old man that everybody hates, who is
Yeah.
maybe a good final boss in a video game. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would enjoy just beating him up.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because Haposai has been introduced for a while in this storyline. Let me see. He was introduced in chapter 63 of the manga, and this arc begins with chapter 125. So he's well established as a character along with everyone else. But most stories involving Haplsai, he's just a comedic rival. Like, he is a huge threat in the sense that, like, he is arguably the most powerful martial artist around. He's the typical wise old man martial artist who's like 200 years old and he knows all the techniques. He's that stereotype while also being the other old man stereotype of just a big old pervert creep, and everyone's either hates him or terrified of him or both. Most
Right.
likely both. Um, but for the most part, if he's around, it's for goofy hijinks. He's like constantly portrayed as just sort of like pathetic. He's the definitive like, hey man, it's my birthday. You're gonna beat me up on my birthday. I'm just a little old man. Oh,
Yeah,
just a little
yeah,
birthday man. Like if you upset him, he will like fake cry over the dumbest things. He will come up with like wacky hijinks to get his revenge. In fact, this arc begins with what's already become kind of a cliche in the series by this point, which is he's just stealing panties or something. He's just going door to door, stealing underwear, being a creep, and Ranma like throws a bucket at him or kicks him and trips him and helps a bunch of teenage girls beat him up, you
yeah. Right.
know? This frequently happens and often is the instigator to make Happosai be like, "Oh, you crossed me for the last time. Wait till you see my latest crazy scheme, like the time he invented a mold bomb or something dumb like that." Uh, it's a fairly standard storyline. Happosai wants to be a creepy old man. Ranma's like, "You suck, old man," and gets in his way. And then Happosai comes up with some revenge scheme, which is often some kind of bizarre, like obscure martial arts technique or some kind of mystical artifact that he just happens to have. And often these result in comedic situations. This arc, however, is again nearly twice as long as the longest previous arc, way longer than most. By this point, the average storyline in the manga was like 1 to 3 chapters. We were starting to get a lot of one-offs.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, this one's a lot longer because this is basically the first and only time that this is like a proper like shonen anime showdown of we need to defeat Happosai. There are actual stakes. Ranma has to challenge this old man and beat him in a battle. This is not a comedic moment where Ranma's dealing with his crazy old grandpa or whatever. This is a fight that Ranma needs to win. And, a very straightforward story that just happens to involve all the familiar characters. So, again, I understand why this is a good thing to adapt.
Hmm.
So, the general plot maybe doesn't matter yet for video game purposes, but essentially, this moxibustion technique, so again, involves like burning stuff on the skin. Happosai basically burns a mark on Ranma that makes him weak. And now Ranma cannot fight back, which is how the stakes are raised. Ranma literally cannot fight, which, as opposed to everything I've said up until now, is maybe a good reason not to adapt this storyline.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I said that this arc is easily split into 3 chunks. The first chunk is Ranma discovering that he cannot fight back, he is weak. And just to mess with him, Happosai just announces to everyone, Ranma's weak, now's your chance, everyone. And then multiple people jump him and attack him, and Ranma cannot defeat any of them. Which brings it back to, once again, maybe this is a good thing to adapt into a video game, because all the characters show up, but they just show up to fight Ranma and that's it. They're not relevant to the plot. Is an easy excuse to just bring in characters.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, which I suppose is a good segue to the first adaptation of this, which is not a full adaptation, but I would like to talk about the PC Engine game Dato Ganso Musabetsu Kakutorio, which translate to one of the many comically long Ranma one half video game titles. They all translate to something goofy like, oh, street martial arts combat chapter or intense indiscriminate grappling chapter. Just a goofy like fake martial arts sounding name.
yeah. Right,
So
right,
I never bother learning their translations. But this one is a sort of fighting game. I say sorta because, well, what's your opinion? Is Street Fighter 1 a fighting game?
Yeah, it's a fighting game with one character.
Yeah, well, that's basically what this is.
Okay.
It's a fighting game, but with one character. There's technically a versus mode that you unlock afterwards that you can play like watered down versions of the other characters. But for the most
Mm,
part, it's like you just fight the characters, and some of them have little weird, funky gimmicks. Like when you fight the principal, he just summons crabs. And there's just
right.
the screen is just full of crabs. And like obviously in like a versus match, you can't just have one player summon infinite crabs. Um, but in the single player mode, you're just fighting all kinds of weirdos. Some of them have gimmicks. Most of them are adaptations of various fights from the series. And because this is a PC Engine game, we get fancy cutscenes with voice acting. Incredible CD technology. This is the future.
Wow.
But yeah, most of these are just, hey, remember that time Ranma fought Haposai in the bathhouse? Well, now it's this. This is the bathhouse stage, and you're fighting Haposai. Remember that time he fought Kodachi? Well, now you're in the rhythmic gymnastics martial arts ring. You can do a ring out. There's different rules because
Okay.
Rama can't punch or kick. His moves have been changed for this one fight, so they do weird, fun little gimmicks for the different fights.
Right, right.
Yeah, and then the last chapter or so is the Moxie Bustion technique storyline, where we get the cutscene summarizing what happened,
Ah,
and now it's like everyone's here to beat up Ranma, and here's our excuse to have like a boss rush where you have to fight multiple enemies with one health bar.
okay.
And then, of course, after you do that, then you get the cutscene version of Ranma, briefly summarizing this arc, very briefly, because it is sort of still like fighting game logic. And you do the final boss against Hoppelsai. Now, an interesting problem I noticed is that the whole point of this arc is that Ranma learns a new technique, which allows him to defeat Hoppelsai. This video game, at least, like, it treats Hoppelsai kind of like a victory lap, because for this one fight only, you can now use this move that will essentially just beat the fight for you. You c- you could just not use it and fight him normally, but like it's the same Haposai, he just has more health.
Right, right.
So, I mean, if you want to do hard mode, sure, but like for the sake of story reasons, you can do the move and Ranma wins and it'll play the cutscene and then the credits roll as it's like, yeah, that was that story. Very straightforward game. Um kind of mediocre. It is apparently one of the easiest Ranma games to find because no matter what game I searched for, the YouTube video of showing a long play of this was always the first result. Anyone can watch it, and since it's an adaptation, you don't really need to know what anyone's saying. If you've seen the anime or read the manga, you know what's happening. You can just watch this and see and be like, oh, it's like Street Fighter 1. It's not like a proper versus two-player fighting game, but like, you're just Ranma fighting various characters. Easy to understand, very quick to just click on a like 30-minute YouTube video, and that's everything you need to know. Because there are a lot of these games where like I've heard people talk about them, and it is very clear that they just read like two sentences off a wiki, and that is their full knowledge.
One of the top results I got when searching this game was a uh, clearly fan-run website that's like it seems to be like a compendium of like a bunch of PC Engine games, and it looks like
Well,
straight out of the '90s. I love it.
oh yeah, yeah, definitely. If you're really into that aesthetic of like these 90s like sprite-based cutscenes,
Yeah.
there's way more of them that look better. There's at least one game where it looks worse, but a lot of them that look way better than this. If you want that, there's better games to suggest. If you're just even if you're into this like 90s aesthetic, you don't even have to resort to this game. But again, it's like 30 minutes. You don't need to understand Japanese. It's very easy to just look at and be like, "Yep, that's video games in the 90s." If you're an anime fan, this is exactly what I expected.
It definitely, you're describing the aesthetic exactly. Yeah,
It is 100% what you are expecting when you just picture a Ranma one half video game from the early 90s.
yeah.
Um, and so I suppose I should then jump to a second one. I will go back to the original storyline, but not yet because this second game is also not a full adaptation.
Okay.
It's similar to this first game. It just kind of becomes about the Moxibustion technique right at the end so that we have an excuse to make Hopplesai the final boss.
Right.
So here we have Rama one half Netsuretsu Kakuto Hen, which again is another one of those. I've learned that hen means chapter. Because so many of these games end with like hen. It's the something chapter, the indiscriminate street brawling chapter. Just wacky, cheesy martial arts names.
Yeah.
Uh this game is it is like it is a side scrolling adventure game.
Yeah. Okay.
So you are Ranma. You go around, you talk to characters, but it's side scrolling. There's a lot of these Ramna one half adventure games because I know people are weird about video game genres. When I say adventure game, I'm referring, of course, to like think of like the Famicom Detective Club games, the Portopio
Okay.
Serial Murders, or Snatcher. You know, that type of adventure game where it's mostly screens and you select actions from a menu, and they're all variants of that. And this is like that, except instead of selecting actions from a menu, you are walking left to right in an actual like town. And you just walk up to people, and because it's a Game Boy, that's maybe the reason they simplified it. You just walk up to a person and their dialogue pops up. You don't even have to press a button.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Right away, first problem with this game, it you can't play it in English. That's the case with most of these games, but again, the previous one just a straight adaptation. You can tell from the cutscenes what is happening if you are familiar with the original story. This one, these are Game Boy cutscenes, by which I mean just dialogue boxes, and that is it. So, a lot harder to understand what is going on.
Hmm.
Um, I played through multiple of these games by just pointing my phone at it and using the Google Translate feature line by line, which was very time consuming and not perfect. Of all of these, I think this game probably gave my phone the most trouble because wouldn't you know it, turns out a tiny little font made for a tiny little Game Boy screen is maybe not as legible as you would like for it to be.
Right. Right.
So, this is maybe the one that I understand the plot the least. Um, Something involving Jusenkyo. I'm not entirely sure what the plot is, but I can tell from like screenshots that the game begins with Ranma receiving some kind of letter that involves Jusenkyo, like that was allegedly from the Jusenkyo Guide, and this results in Ranma having to go around town talking to various characters and meet up with the other cursed characters. I'm not sure why, and I think it in the end it turns out that this letter was fake, because like midway through, he gets attacked by a ninja. And when I say a ninja, I mean like this looks like the Ninja Gaiden guy from like the original Super Nintendo kind of ninja, like the most generic, stereotypical ninja man you can imagine. just shows up and fights Ranma because once again these adventure games keep putting in combat in some form. This game was probably the worst because again, there's no menus. So they tried to actually have real-time combat where you have a button for jumping and a button for attacking, and you can do punches and kicks by pressing B and a direction, and it has the absolute worst hitbox detection I've ever played. Literally, like, I would have moments where I'm crouched in the corner, spamming the kick button, and the enemy can't hit me, but also I can't hit the enemy.
Amazing.
Like I'm doing the kick, but I can only presume that the damage box is at the tip of Rama's foot, which goes past the enemy. So now I cannot hurt this guy, but also the enemy doesn't have a way to hit me while I'm crouching. And that's the kind of game this is. Uh, Whenever it stops being an adventure game, it becomes the absolute worst.
Yeah. Uh, Two things. One, Wikipedia inaccurately lists this game's genre as fighting, which is very funny to me. Because it's just like I guess you do fight like there are one-on-one fights, but it's just
Yeah,
so
yeah.
clearly
Like this I've dubbed this feeling the oh everyone read the same wiki as
right.
me feeling of like this was whoever put that probably did not play this game.
No, definitely not.
It is just a game of telephone of like people regurgitating the same info that's been circulating since like the 90s. Somebody looked at this game and put like a guide of like these are all the Ranma games. Here's like a two-sentence description of them, and every other instance of something listing all the games is just doing the same. They're not actually sitting down to play those. I
Yeah.
run into this all the time, especially with the video games in particular. um, it's really funny. There's one game which it's like a top-down puzzle game with like pushing blocks and stuff. The Wikipedia page compares this to Adventures of Lolo.
I saw that, and then I saw them say top down, and I'm like, that's not what Adventures of Lolo is a side scroller,
No,
isn't
Adventures
it?
of Lolo is top-down.
Okay. I'm
I have
already
seen it.
confused with a
They
different
are
game.
they are similar. It's not an unjustified comparison. It's just that like how many top-down block-pushing puzzle games were there in this era? It's just so funny to specifically compare it to this, The Adventures of Lolo. And because of this, I have seen multiple videos and podcasts bring up this game, and they will always make the exact same comparison, and that's about all they have to say about it. And I'm just like, aha, I see you also read that sentence on Wikipedia. Good job.
uh,
Which, I don't want to throw shade at anyone. Like, again, just a few minutes ago, I talked about having to point my phone at the screen for every individual line, and I still couldn't tell what was happening. I don't expect people to play these games at all. It's just really funny to constantly see the same, like, one to two sentences of information everywhere.
right.
And just this overwhelming feeling of like, oh, I'm going in alone. Whatever I learn from this experience, I'm not gonna have a lot of people who can relate to it. Uh, but yes, just to let you know, the combat sections are terrible. I'm trying to think how many are there. There is a skippable one at the beginning because you can fight Tatewaki Kuno, but if you're in girl form, you just skip it
Hmm.
because then he grabs Rama and Rama punches him and then he's blasting off again. There's a
Yeah.
fight against this ninja guy. Again, he's just a ninja. It's like this guy just looks like a boring ass like normal ninja. Like who is this? I wish I could properly translate those scenes because I'm curious how this is presented. I think there's like another other rival fights. I think at some point you fight Ryoga, then at some point you fight Kodachi. Then eventually you get a rematch with the ninja. And then after you defeat him, you do round two, but he's like 5 feet tall. And then you beat him, and then in the next cutscene, you're talking to Haposai. So
Okay.
based on context clues, I think the ninja was Haposai in disguise
Okay.
somehow.
All right.
I think that's what's happening because from that point on, the whole Chusenkyo plot is seemingly not mentioned, and after that, then it becomes a straight adaptation of the Moxie Bustion arc, and the
Right.
ninja never appears again. I think that's what's happening. I can't think of any other explanation for why the ninja shrunk, and then suddenly you're fighting Haposai.
Watching this footage, this game really looks like a fake video game that would be a gag in another anime. Like this is like something they'd play on an episode of Lucky Star or something.
Absolutely. It's so funny. Like the very first thing I did, because like you start with the opening cutscene, you get the letter, and you gain control. You're in a room. You can talk to any of the sisters. They just have dialogue. Then you go out and you're in the hallway. If you go to the right, you go to the rest of the game. I immediately went left. I found a locked door, and then I went left further, and then I triggered a cutscene of Ranma falling into the pool, and then just a little like now he's a girl, and now I'm
Mm,
playing as girl Ranma. Um, I mentioned you can skip the Tachewaki Kuno fight if you're girl Ranma. As far as I could tell, that is the only time in like the entire game where it matters which version of Ranma you are.
okay.
I think
I love
maybe at
that.
one point I had to turn into a boy to like talk to Shampoo about something, but then I immediately changed back. Um, Also really funny, you can't change back for the entirety of chapter one. Uh, because the locked room I mentioned is the bath. After chapter one, you unlock it and you can go in to take a
Uh,
hot bath and become a boy again. I just think it's funny that it's not unlocked at the start.
that
So
is
I just
funny.
tripped and fell, and now I'm girl Ranma, and I can't go back even if I want to. I don't know why I would, but yeah, it is funny how many games like have a mechanic for switching between boy and girl Ranma, but there's no difference. Like in the fighting games, you can play as both, and they're identical pretty much. But like they let you do it because like what are you gonna do? Not let you play as girl Ranma?
Right.
So this game is an adventure game. Most of the gameplay, like I've complained about the fighting, but again, there's like maybe 5 fights total. But for the most part, you are running around town talking to people. And again, there's no menus like in the PC adventure games. It's a Game Boy game. They have to fit everything on one screen. So the only thing you can do is just walk up to a character and it will trigger dialogue. So the only actual like puzzles you solve is just the age-old pixel hunt gameplay of what order am I supposed to do these things in.
Right. Yeah, that's the vibe I'm getting from this footage I'm watching.
Yeah. This I remember being super excited within the first couple of seconds of this game because you get to actually walk around town. And it took like maybe a couple minutes to realize, oh no, there's nothing in this town. There's nothing. Uh you eventually get like a world map. Like basically there are locations with characters in them. And then when you leave that building, you are out on the street. And if you keep walking in one direction, you will then hit the edge of that street, and then you'll get taken to the world map, where you can select a different screen. In which case, there's a building at the end of that screen where you can enter and talk to another character. There is almost never anything in between, ever. There's like two streets that have more than one thing on them. One of them is the street you start on, which has the Tendo house, and also Dr. Tofu's office on the other end of the street next to the world map transition. Uh and there's another part where like there's a little park in the middle of the street and Cologne appears there once and then after you talk to her, that's it. She doesn't appear in that spot again. So for the most part, every single time you select a street, you just have to walk to the very end, enter a building, talk to someone, then leave the building and walk all the way back to the other end of the street so you can get back to the world map. There is never anything in between. You can jump and kick even when there's no combat, and that's the only thing you can do to save boredom. You can jump on the buildings, and it's just so goofy. Like there's nothing here. You're just walking. It literally could have been replaced with menus of like you leave and then you're at the world map, select which building. The streets that you actually have to walk on are so superfluous. They are the most blatant padding. If you took those out, the game would probably be like 20 minutes long.
Like this, the whole game could have just been menus.
Yes, the entire game could have just been menus because all you have to do is just find the correct order to talk to these characters in. That's the only gameplay they can do until you trigger a fight, in which case, good luck hitting anything. It feels random. The hitboxes just make no sense. So that's the general gameplay loop. Again, I'm not 100% sure on the plot. Ranma, for some reason, this letter that I assume was forged by Hoppelsai, now has to search for the other uh cursed characters and talk to them. And there's just various things like you go look for shampoo, you go look for Ryoga, you go to his house, and you just get a cutscene of like the door to the house, and Rama's like, "I wonder where Ryoga is," and then you get like a little scene of like Ryoga in like tropical beach, and he's like, "I think I'm in Hokkaido," or just a silly goofy joke that Ryoga is lost once again. Um, but also sometimes you get puzzles of like at one point Ryoga shows up, but he doesn't just show up. You have to go to his house again after failing to meet him and be like, oh man, he's still not here. Then once you do that, you make it so that if you go to a different street, so again, you have to leave that building, walk all the way to the end of the street, select the street that Ukio's restaurant is at, walk all the way down there to Ukio's place, and then you'll get dialogue of her being like, hey, I saw Ryoga, he's back in town, and then leave that building all the way out the street, select Ryoga's house again, walk all the way to the end, go to his house, get another cutscene of him not answering the door, and then as you leave, Ryoga is on the street but like 5 feet from his door. So again, this could have just been a menu. The fact that he's outside the house doesn't really matter.
So it's like it's not even a challenge to figure out where you're trying to go. It's just like the fact that you have to walk there physically with no feedback.
Yes. So, another feeling I had, so I looked up a guide because I saw that there was one, and I'm like, I know what these games are like, and I can't fully translate it. Let me keep up this guide open. It did not take me long to realize that whoever wrote this guide on GameFAQs also could not read Japanese and had no idea what was happening because the entire guide was just go to this place, go to this place, go here, talk to Akane's dad, he does a thing, go here, shampoo says something, now go to Ukio's, etc. Like no description of what's actually happening, just giving you a series of steps of going to them. And I eventually noticed some of these steps were not necessary because even if I couldn't read the Japanese, I could at least tell when dialogue had not changed. So there were parts of the guide where it's like, now go to the house, talk to Akane's dad, and then go to Dr. Tofu's clinic and talk to Akane. And I did that, but Akane's dad's dialogue hasn't changed since the start of the chapter.
That's so
And then I
funny.
went to talk to Akane. So I think the person writing the guide just assumed that you had to do them in this order. because maybe they missed Akane's dialogue, but then once they triggered it, they're like, oh no, what did I do different? Well, I did talk to her dad. Maybe that's the reason.
That's so
But I
funny.
don't think that was the reason. It is funny, and like kudos to people doing their best. I've run into a similar problem before where like there's another adventure game I won't talk about here because that one does have an original plot that might take longer to recap. But like I saw the Wikipedia summary and it had the same issue of it wasn't actually describing the plot. It was just describing visually what was happening on the screen and also getting some details wrong. And I'm like, this person clearly did not actually read what the dialogue was saying. They were just watching a playthrough and looking at the cutscenes and just making a summary based on that. Because this wiki description gives no information about the plot whatsoever.
Incredible.
Right. So, for the most part, this is the entire game. It is just walking around, and it gets really tiring. I'm very glad that I played this on an emulator, because I could just speed up the walking. And
True.
it's just like, and it's always at the very end of the street. It's not like there's like anything in the middle. Just hold left or right until you hit the end, and now you're at the building. That's it.
Right.
That's all you have to do. But anyways, this is for the most part all you do, with the occasional fighting, with one exception.
Yeah.
I am going to link you a video. I know you saw footage. I'm not sure what you found. Most of the footage I saw is just a couple minutes long.
Yeah, I found a Daily Motion clip that was like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Um, I don't know where this video came from because YouTube says it's 2 years old, but when I looked for footage, this did not appear. I had to just play the game manually myself. But I guess this video was always around. This is a full playthrough of the game, and I'm going to give you a timestamp at around 14 minutes and 30 seconds. So if anyone wants to look it up for themselves, Rama one half, Netsuretsu Kakutohen. Again, good luck finding this walkthrough because for some reason YouTube did refuse to let me know it existed 6 months ago. Anyways, I would like you to describe to me what you are looking at.
Okay. Uh, oh my fucking god. The fucking. It was fucking Mega Man disappearing block maze, are you kidding me?
Yes! It's the actual disappearing blocks from Mega Man. The ones that are like, doo, doo,
Yeah, yeah,
and just a platforming section where you just have to do a Mega Man disappearing block maze.
It seems pretty lengthy too. Though I will note that the person doing this long play is like clearly skipping over like parts that you're supposed to platform through. Like they're like doing running jumps and skipping over
Yes,
things you're obviously supposed to.
they sequence skip some of the parts because what you're not seeing is that if you hold the run button for too long, Ranma will just go careening off the edge of the screen into oblivion. And I tried that once, and I very quickly learned do not do that again. It is
Yeah,
not safe.
it does seem like Ranma accelerates really quickly.
It's insane. And like this sequence is only like a minute long in the footage. Like you get to the end and that's it. What is not included in this footage is see it's a maze. You could see it like they were skipping over multiple doors and there are
Yeah, I
parts where like
noticed
you could go
that.
left or right. You could go left or right and the player just instantly went to the end. It is a maze. Some of those doors will take you backwards or to different sections. It is technically a single long like level, and the doors just take you forwards and backwards. But sometimes there's big walls blocking your way, and you have to take a door. Which is again why in this footage sometimes the player just sequence skips and jumps over stuff.
What a nightmare.
On top of that, you maybe saw there were pits.
Yeah, what happens if you fall in the pit?
Um, what do you think is the worst thing that could happen if you fall in a pit?
I mean, like, get sent back to the beginning?
See, you would think that. No. If you fall in a pit, it takes you backwards, but to a random spot.
Oh, God.
But by which I mean each individual space on the pits has its own specific location that it dumps you to. Sometimes even within the same pit, if a pit is like really wide, if you fall on one end, it will take you back to a different location, and then if you fall on the other end. And because it's a maze, if you fall, who knows where you end up. But the absolute worst part in all of this, as you maybe would have guessed when I talked about how I quickly learned do not press the run button, this game does not control very well.
No, yeah.
I don't know if you saw, there's a part where the player made a jump, and then mid-jump, they kicked. And it's the one time that the player kicks mid-air. So you think, oh, maybe they accidentally pressed the kick button. No. Because this game functions under the everyone's favorite of classic video games with fixed jump arcs.
Oh, cool, yeah.
But I guess something I didn't know is that I guess if you kick, you have some little semblance of control for half a second. Because at one point in this footage, they straight up do a jump that I knew was not safe, but they kicked, and I guess that kick helped them land properly. Because whenever I try to make that jump, Ranma will just jump over the edge and fall in a pit. And then there's, of course, the fact that these are still disappearing blocks. So you also have to worry about the timing.
I see.
This was a complete nightmare. It was the absolute worst. And maybe to make it even worse, this is the only platforming section in the entire game.
Yeah, I got that sense, and that's like, okay, is this like near the middle, near the beginning, near the end?
Near the beginning,
Okay.
it's like towards the middle of chapter 2. But
Okay.
again, like in this video, it's around the 14-minute mark.
I didn't see the runtime on that long play. How long is the game?
Well, this video is an hour and 7 minutes.
Okay.
Like, this took me multiple sessions to beat on my own, because, again, I couldn't find this video. I got stuck on the maze for some time.
Hmm.
In fact, the maze was the reason I started looking for long plays, so
Right.
that I could just translate those, but I couldn't find this one for some reason. Uh, yeah, this was a rough section. You want to know the craziest part, though?
Yeah.
There's no reason for it to be there.
Yeah.
Like, not at all. Like, Ranma has to go around talking to the different characters, right? So at one point, he goes to the Kuno mansion, and then you enter the building, and it's just a Mega Man stage. And you just have to do this whole sequence just to get to the end and talk to the characters like you have with everyone else. And as far as I can tell, they don't acknowledge the Mega Man stage you just had to do.
Well, they remodeled.
Yeah, this is just what the inside of the Kuno mansion looks like. I can only imagine that Dr. Wily's career as an interior decorator is going very well. But yeah, but also there's another worst part because at one point they make you go back to the maze.
Oh shit.
And you want to know the even worse part?
Yeah.
Your goal isn't to get to the end again. So even if you remember the order of sequence you're supposed to do to get to the end, that's not what you're supposed to do.
Oh,
You're
you have to
supposed
like.
to look for You're supposed to look for Hopplesai, because after this, like the whole after he becomes the main antagonist, you're chasing him around town, and
Mm,
for the most part, it's just aha, he's over here, and you just get a cutscene. But then you have to go back to the Kuno mansion, which for some reason is a disappearing block maze, and he's just somewhere in the maze, just in the middle of it,
ugh,
and you have to find him. And the worst part, he's up high. You can't
oof.
jump to him. You have to fall from one of the pits. And for that one, I absolutely like, I'm glad I did find the guide because I'm like, how how are you even supposed to do this other than just falling in every pit and hoping one of them dumps you into that spot? Like, there's just this little alcove that, like, I saw that and I couldn't jump up there. So I'm like, oh, I guess that's a fail state for somewhere later in the maze where you fall and it dumps you here and you have to start over. Um, and that's where they put Hopplesai,
Ugh.
and you have to do
So
the maze again.
that's so mean. I guess you gotta extend that that $40 you spent on this Game Boy game.
Yep. On top of that, after this sequence and you talk to the characters, I mean, what do you always do when you talk to the character? You're like, okay, you talk to them. Now to go back to the world map, you have to manually walk out of the maze, which isn't difficult because you could just keep falling in the pits and it will take you closer and closer to the entrance. But you still have to manually do it. You just have to walk to the very start and then leave the house. And then, because the house is at the end of the street, then you have to continue walking past the street back to the world map.
Incredible.
This this was quite the game to play. Um and is maybe the worst experience I've had while playing the Ranma games. If only for this one maze. It might still arguably be the worst, even without the maze, because it's honestly just kind of boring.
Right.
You're just walking around, you're talking to the characters. The only logic is what order do I do these things in, and the combat sections are terrible. But yeah, the maze makes it the absolute worst, which I suppose brings us back to the Moxie Bustion arc, because that's what happens towards the end.
Mm,
So once you chase Hopplesai enough times, then you get the rest of the story arc, which I have not explained yet because the first game didn't cover it. But in this game it is, because eventually it's time for Rama to go to the mountains and train. And then you unlock the mountains on the world map. And I was curious because I'm like, every location so far has been generic Japanese suburbs. And then
right.
you enter a building, with the sole exception being, this one maze in the middle. But now you're going to the mountains. What's there? Turns out it's a cutscene, and
Damn.
that's it. No walking, no nothing. You select it on the world map, and then it just plays a cutscene that summarizes the rest of the Moxie Bustion arc. And then it's like, okay, time to fight Hopplesai. And then you unlock the bathhouse, which is not where he fought Hopplesai in the original, but we gotta go somewhere unique, I guess. And what at the bathhouse? Another cutscene. And then you just start the final boss against Hopplesai. Now, if you recall, as I mentioned of the previous game, Ranma learns a new technique that he uses to beat Hopplesai,
Yeah.
which means you could just not fight. Here they handle it a little different. First of all, Ranma's weak. He cannot fight. So what they do is, like, the first time you fight Hopplesai, you can't beat him. Um, if you hit him, it does no damage. You have to lose. And this is where we get the problem of me spending like 5 minutes trying to lose this fight on purpose because Hopplesai, I don't know what his AI is trying to do, but he just sort of shimmies back and forth and occasionally does like a punch that's like 2 pixels wide, and I have to be standing right in front of him to get hit by it. And he seems to do it completely randomly. I tried so hard to bait him to attack me. I tried standing still. I tried crouching. I tried being right up close to him. I tried being like a medium distance from him. I could not find a way to consistently get him to hit me. I just had to run around and hope I was standing next to him when he does his tiny little baby punch. And then eventually he killed me and the plot progressed.
I love that. I've never heard of a scripted battle that's hard to lose.
And then more plot happens, and then eventually once you do the final fight, you have to do that sequence again because they don't give you like it in the previous game. You get like they give you a meter, and once it's at max you just press a button and Rama does his super move. Because this is on the Game Boy, they didn't really do anything complex. Instead, it's basically you have to get down to 1 HP left, and then it will just trigger a cutscene of Ranma doing the move and winning the fight. So the final boss is me once again trying to get Hopplesai to kill me, and he refuses.
Great.
It's the exact same fight, too. Just no difference. He's just jumping around all the same, and me trying to get hit because in order to trigger the cutscene, I have to be down to 1 HP. And that's how that game ends. Then you just get the cutscene, and that's the end of the weakness Moxie Bastion arc. Ranma's victorious. He gets his strength back, and that is yet another video game adaptation of that same arc. Does things a little differently than the first one.
Yeah.
So I suppose I will at least give it credit. In the original version, it's an actual fight. Ranma doesn't just instantly win as soon as he learns the technique. So I'm not a fan of just here's a new move that instantly wins. At least this
Right.
version tried to replicate the fact that like it is a proper fight, except that like because of how they handled it, I'm like just trigger the cutscene, please. I'm waiting. I let him hit me, please. But it's something. And those are the first two games to cover this arc. And again, they just sort of covered at the very last minute. Most of both games are completely unrelated stuff where you just go around fighting the other characters in a just random unrelated story.
Right.
Or in the case of Kodachi, go through her block maze apparently. But yeah, there's that game. And so next, I have one last game to talk about. Um, but I should maybe go back to the original story because this last game actually covers more than just the generic basic events. So, you know, to those of you who have not watched the original version of this storyline or read it, um, now it's time to return. I'm sure you've been at the edge of your seats. So, Ranma cannot fight. He is weak. We get the first act, which is various people try and beat him up, including the funny joke where like Ryoga is like the honorable rival, so everyone else just wants to kick Rama's ass, but Ryoga is like, I can't bear to see you like this, Kakarot. This is such a disgrace. And just like he does not like he can't fight someone who can't defend himself. This is so sad. He's so upset as he just punches a tree and then over the course of his speech, doesn't realize he is now punching Ranma in the face, and thus beating up Ranma anyways, like everyone else. Funny joke. But yeah, for the most part, the first act is just Ranma getting his ass kicked because he can't do anything, and he can't get back at Hopplesai. So, he must now train. The second act, as was shown in the previous game, Ranma goes to the mountains. He must train and figure out a way to defeat Hopplesai despite being unable to physically fight back. And he also takes Ukia with him, which is neat. It's very rare for her to be along for something that's not relevant to her, but that's cute. But the main focus is Shampoo's grandma Cologne shows up and decides she's going to teach Ranma a new technique, the Hiryu Shoten Ha, which is actually part of the namesake for this last game, Hiryu Densetsu, the story of the rising dragon or whatever, because that's what the move translates to. It's another wacky long kung fu name of like rising dragon of the something something.
Hmm.
So this is basically the part where like now we're getting into real like kung fu movie territory of like it's not just punches and kicks. Now Ranma has to learn how to manipulate his ki, whatever you want to call it. Um, because if he can't physically fight back, he can at least use his fighting energy to defeat Happosai, and that's the basis of this move. And we get an entire training arc because um I imagine we eventually get a character that can just shoot Hadouken blasts. That is not the norm. Here, even just to do one big energy blast, it is this insanely convoluted process where Ranma has to A, be completely calm and focused, B, have him and his opponent move in a perfect spiral, and C, have his opponent have a bunch of hot energy so that he can then combine that hot chi with his own cold, calm chi and create a wind current of the hot and cold air to create a big tornado that launches the enemy upwards. And this is meant to be a perfect technique versus Haposai because it's actually stronger the stronger your opponent is. The more angry and aggressive and fight energy they have, the more chi you have to work with to launch them upwards. Um, but of course, this is multiple steps. So first they have to do the montage of trying to learn how to stay calm as Ranma's dad shows Akane and Ukyo his like naked baby pictures or something, and Ranma has to like, no, stop it. Uh and then they have to do the sequence of Ranma moving a perfect spiral. He's like super easy, and they do that, and then Cologne points at his footprints on the ground, and it's like complete off balance, and it's like no, it has to be a perfect spiral. And then the last trick of like he needs the opponent to be angry, to which they're like, well, it can't be Akane or Ukyo because they're gonna hold back. We need to make Ryoga angry and wacky shenanigans, and eventually Ranma learns the technique. This is a whole extended sequence. This is the entire second act. So again, in the anime version, this is an entire episode that I'm describing. A lot happens, and there's some funny moments, but for the most part, this is an actual serious training montage because Happosai is a serious threat this one time. He has to be defeated. And that leads
Mm.
to the last of the acts where Ranma goes back and challenges Happosai and immediately loses because Happosai knows the technique and he knows that if he also remains calm and does not provide Ranma with hot energy, Ranma can't make a tornado. So then it becomes okay, not only do you have to fight Happosai, you have to make him angry, you have to get hot energy, and you have to do the perfect spiral, all the things, and that's why it's a serious fight. Rama doesn't just when Rama does the move, he instantly wins. But actually getting to the point where he can use the move is what the challenge is about. This is what the stand battle is about. Rama has to create these specific series of steps in order to win. It's not enough to just do the move.
I am finding very little about this game.
You're
I
still
like
looking
I
it
see
up.
I can find a total of like 5 screenshots.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, I will get to that in a bit, but that one gave me the most trouble. Might be the most obscure of all these games. Anyways, just for the sake of it, so I don't leave people hanging, if you've never heard of this storyline, I will cover details about it, even though none of the games adapt the full story. Because again, all the video games, they skip the part about Ranma having to fight Happosai twice afterwards, and then trying to figure out how to make him give the hot energy, etc. Because in the original story, it's meant to be a big deal where Rama's trying to figure out, and he's like, I got it. And then he leaves. And then Akane's trying to figure out what is Ranma's plan. And then during the fight, Ranma reveals his secret. And then he pulls out photos of himself as a girl. And Hoppelsai's like, it's no big deal. I've seen it before. I've seen what you look like. I am completely calm and collected. There is no hot energy here. And then Ranma, it's like he's a Yu-Gi-Oh villain flipping the card over to reveal what the photo is. And this isn't just any picture of Ranma in girl form. It's Ranma wearing women's underwear. And it's like, everyone's surprised. This is the first time Ranma has willingly worn. He hasn't just turned into a girl. He is doing the full on like lingerie modeling shoot with the sexy underwear and doing the photos because as Ranma figures out, he doesn't need to Happosai to get angry. He just needs passionate, hot energy. So if he can make Happosai horny and get him excited, he gets he gets the hot air to make the rising dragon tornado. But but again, Happosai's constantly a creepy old man. You got to do something special to catch him off guard. So Ranma tries on the underwear for the first time. This is canonically the first time Ranma wears women's underwear. Not the last, because I guess once he does it once, it's easy to just do it again. Um, but for the most part, like, keep in mind, this is after the point where Ranma has apparently gotten in the habit of just carrying bras around him specifically to trap Hoppelsai. It's like the Wily Coyote. Like he just Ranma constantly has a supply of women's underwear specifically for trap purposes, just to hit Hoppelsai somehow. But he hasn't worn them until now. I will point out this does. I am curious where Ranma got them because I assume if he took them from Akane or someone, she probably would have been very upset by that, which implies that Ranma bought these for himself. He's just not wearing them. But this is canonical now. So, to everyone keeping track at home, Ranma officially owns his own ladies' underwear. He cannot beat the allegations. And that is how he defeats Hoppelsai. Now, worth noting, again, this is not. Obviously, that whole sequence with the photos can't be replicated in a video game. They either don't acknowledge it at all or they just turn it into a cutscene. But the ending of the arc is noteworthy because they managed to turn it into a cute moment where like Akane gets caught in the tornado because the tornado causes Happosai to lose the paper that has the reverse Moxibustion pattern they need. So she
Mm,
tries to get it, but then she gets caught in the tornado, and Ranma has to choose between the two. And he, of course, chooses to save Akane, which causes the paper to get torn into pieces. And we get the ending where Rama's like, it's okay. I don't need strength. I managed to get the moral victory, and that's what matters. Anyways, I'm gonna go in the corner now. Nobody follow me as he just goes and cries in the corner, feeling sad. This is the part where it's like, quick, the pieces are scattering. We can still find them. And all of Ranma's friends gather the pieces and tape them together for him to prove that they really do care. Um, and it's a nice sweet ending where they just show it and like they're able to do the reverse technique and Ranma gets his strength back and it's a nice happy ending, which is yet another reason why it's probably a good story to adapt because it has a very safe happy ending. It doesn't end with a goofy joke. It's like no, Ranma defeats the villain and then all of his friends support him and cheer him on and help him. And he's like, thanks, guys, everyone. And we get the happy shonen ending. A
yeah.
very straightforward story to tell. So that's the Moxie Bustion arc. And now that I've explained the full thing, I can jump to Hiryu Densetsu. Before I talk about the game itself, I want to talk about the struggles this game put me through. So, Hiryu Densetsu is an adventure game. It is technically a point and click adventure game. I say technically because you're pointing and clicking, but at big giant buttons that say like talk or examine or etc.
Mm,
So it may as well be the regular menu. The only difference is that now it's big giant buttons you click on.
right.
Or like you click on the button with Akane's face rather than selecting talk and then the name Akane from a list. But it is an adventure game. There were two versions of it, one for the PC-98 and another on the MSX. As far as I'm aware, they're the same game, although they have different art.
Mm,
I found like the first 10 minutes of the MSX game, as well as the recap, because both games have like a recap telling you who all the characters are. And it seems that they tell the same information, and most of the art is like different renditions of the same art, but for different resolutions on different systems. But it's the same thing. It's just, everything's been redrawn for two different systems. And as far as I'm aware, um, the MSX game is probably not as good. Doesn't look as good. The audio quality isn't
yeah,
as great. Um, Unfortunately, that's the only version I could find. I had no idea how I could play the PC-98 version unless I get lucky and find like a $500 copy off eBay or something.
yeah.
I just could not find it. And I couldn't find footage of this game. Like you said, you looked it up. You're finding like five screenshots.
Yeah. Literally, the
I
most
couldn't.
in-depth information I can find on this is stuff about like hidden files and uh, anti-piracy screens.
Yes. Oh, yes. The anti-piracy screen. You found that.
Yeah,
That is in fact the most information I could find is the fact that this game does have an anti-piracy screen, which is just a picture of naked Ranma being like, "Too bad,"
yeah.
which which is silly. This game a lot hornier than your average Ranma media, by which I
Seemingly,
mean
yeah.
like um when Ranma's in girl form, you can clearly see the nipples outlined on her clothes. Like it's that type of like
Mm,
you didn't have to add that extra bump to the line art, especially on like an old computer game where you have limited sprites and pixels. This game feels like a Dojin game. If you look at footage of it, you will just see all kinds of like the characters look so off model, but in a very specific way, and I don't know how to describe it, but it is 100% Dojin coded. This feels like a fan game
it
and
does very much have that
reads
vibe.
like a fan game. Again, there's all this extra fan service that the original source material didn't usually do. A lot of the content in it feels like fan service because the most notable thing about this game is that it takes like 20 different storylines from the manga and just mushes them together into one cohesive story.
Mm,
It is full of references. So yeah, absolutely like band game coded. It it's not bad. It's just this doesn't look official.
right.
This looks like you're looking at like the DOS version of Mega Man 2 or something. Like this doesn't feel like how it's supposed to be. Even if the art is pretty good. I like some of it. Like the title screen looks really cute. It just feels wrong.
I noticed that. Yeah.
I couldn't find the PC-98 version. I did, however, find um the disk images for the MSX version, which came with 8 images, 8 disk images. I'm like, how many discs did this game come with? And it's just like, how do I even begin to learn to emulate this? Because I tried to figure it out. And it's like, well, one, this is a late MSX version, so it's only compatible with like a specific like color version of MSX, and anything past that.
Right.
But then also, while looking up like forums of people trying to do similar games, most of them only had like three disk images at most, and we're struggling of like, how can I get this running? And you have to do all sorts of weird stuff that I've never had to do. I'm not a computerologist. I don't know how to do these fancy emulator things. If I can't just put in the file and it runs, I don't know what to do. But this game had eight, so I guess it just had a ton of disks or something. Um, and it's just I couldn't get it running, and I couldn't find footage anywhere. And then I tried my final secret weapon. I felt so clever when I figured it out. I'm like, I am so smart. All you gotta do is search for the game in Japanese.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
I'm so clever for thinking of that. And once I did, I found one playthrough by a Japanese streamer from like less than a year ago, the time I found it. And that's it. That is all I could find. Shout outs to that channel because it looks like their entire thing is just playing old PC games from the 90s, which sounds fun.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason I found any footage of this game that I could not emulate. And I'm glad I did, because for one thing, they played the PC 98 version.
Oh.
So who knows how they did that? If they're this passionate about old games, for all I know, they're actually buying these games used and running them properly. Who knows? That's probably a lot easier than trying to run the MSX version. But thankfully, I saw the playthrough. It was nice, and there's a lot of fun things to say about it. So, as I said, it's it's like 20 different stories mushed into one. And it's interesting because you have to imagine this like Ranma alternate timeline where none of these events actually happened, but now they're all happening within the course of one day, and
Yeah.
it's just really silly. It changes the context a little. So like a good example, shampoo shows up in this game multiple times with different wacky schemes. First one, there's a story in the original where Shampoo makes these like hypnosis steam buns to try and trick Ranma into marrying her, and wacky comedy hijinks ensue. And it's like a whole ordeal. They spend the whole day dealing with this problem and then it's fixed. In this version, they're sitting down to eat breakfast. Shampoo shows up, and the next 10 minutes is that entire episode compressed into one scene. And it is pure chaos. It's the exact same events, but having them happen one after the row while they're trying to eat breakfast gives it a completely different energy. In addition to that, the fact that Shampoo causes other wacky hijinks later on in the game that are adaptations of different storylines also has a different energy because originally those stories were like several months apart. But in this game, she's doing all this, like she's showing up like three times in the same day to cause these different problems. Like, Shampoo is such a brat in this version. It's the same events, but because there's so much less time between her wacky shenanigans, it has such a chaotic energy. She is here just to cause problems. And yeah, that's one of the things that I love about this game. This one, unlike the previous game, is actually one of my favorites for that reason. Because even though it's the same events, a lot of the time, the context feels very different and it has this different energy, especially since again the art feels very fan game. It feels bootleg. All the music is like old MIDI versions of the soundtrack from the anime. This is 100% pure fan service. like a fan game. That is what this is. And it's basically what I wanted the previous game to be. You are walking around town as Ranma, running into wacky shenanigans. So, so yeah, a much better experience, and it just happens to be the hardest experience to get. Even
Yeah.
if you can read Japanese, it is still not easy actually getting to play or watch this game. So, this game is also split into three acts, but it's not the three acts of the Moxie Bustion arc. It's different. Act one is just a normal day at home. It is Ranma's daily life. This one has a couple references to the original, but for the most part, it's just all the cliches. You know, Ranma and his dad go to the dojo to train. Wacky hijinks ensue. This does have a combat system, which is basically rock paper scissors, and it seems annoying and random, but it's somehow one of the better ones. These combat system, it's still better than the Game Boy game at least.
Mm,
You get moments of just, you go to the kitchen, you can talk to Kasumi, and she's making breakfast, and she's like, "Oh, we're not done yet, but can you do this for me?" etc. You get your tutorials. You can go to the front house. You can pick up the newspaper and give it to Son, which the person playing did not do.
damn.
So I'm like, what happens if you do that? Do you just get special dialogue? Is it just a tutorial to teach you how to use your inventory? I guess.
Hmm.
I don't know. But you're just going around doing stuff. There's a part where of course Ranma accidentally walks in on Akane in the bath, and so she gets upset. Um, there's a subplot which is not based on anything original. Remember what I said about how whoever made this game, they felt a lot hornier. The one original plot here is that Ranma is gonna get dressed and he finds Akane's bra mixed in with his laundry, and he's like, "Uh-oh, I can't let her know I have this because she's gonna assume I took it." But it's just a mix-up. It's just a mix-up. It just got caught up with his laundry, and now he has to like overtly sneak it back into her room, meaning you spend most of Act 1 with Akane's underwear in your inventory, and the player kept trying to use the item while in conversation with other characters, hoping for something funny to happen. Which it usually didn't. You do usually just get the dialogue of Ranma like, "I am not doing that." Uh, but yeah, wacky hijinks ensue. Again, at one point, Shampoo shows up and is a problem. She interrupts their breakfast. But the big ending to Act 1 is Hopplesai is a problem. Ranma fights him. And then Hopplesai's like, "Oh, I'll show you." And then he runs into town. So then the game is like, "Please eject the floppy disk and put in the next disk," because that's how video games used to be like. And Act Two is a completely different setting because now instead of going around the house, you can go to different sections of town looking for Hopplesai. And this
Mm.
is where the game becomes interesting. So, first thing of note is eventually Ranma bumps into Cologne, and he's like, "If only I could beat that Hopplesai." And she's like, "I can teach you some moves, but you're not ready yet. Come back when you're stronger." Or something. I'm not entirely sure. I forget what even you do. You just go you just go around experiencing mini versions of storylines from the manga. And then once you do enough of them, you can go back to Cologne and she's like, "Oh, you have gotten stronger. Let me teach you a new move." And this is most of the game. So it's not an adaptation of one storyline. It's just Ranma speed running the Ranma series and doing all the wacky comedy shenanigans with all the different characters in one day so that he can be strong enough to defeat Hopplesai. Because that's what Cologne says he needs to do to win. There's no Moxie Bustion stuff yet. And that's just the framing device. So you go around town, interesting stuff happens. The second most notable thing about this game, Ranma has party members.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Like I said, when you talk to someone, like here's a button with Akane's face on it, and you click on it and you talk to Akane. For the most part, characters will stay in one room. But during this act, certain characters will go with Ranma. So at the start, Ranma and Akane split up to find Happosai, but once Ranma gets his mission from Cologne, then you can reunite with Akane, and then she becomes a party member. So now you just permanently have an Akane button that you can click on every screen, and she has unique dialogue on each screen, and she will comment in every possible situation. So you just have the Akane button.
Hmm.
She's just in your party reacting to stuff, including stories she wasn't originally around for. And to me, that's the most fun part of this game. And why, again, this feels like a fan game because they are finding excuses to have characters that originally did not interact with each other. Now Akane is present for everything, and now she has unique dialogue for everything. You're incentivized to just go around talking to Akane and having wacky little adventure game dialogues. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Even more cool is you get three party members in this sequence. So after a while, actually at the start, you go to Ukyo's and she volunteers to help, but she's busy. So you have to come back after solving some puzzles, and then eventually she joins the party. So now you have an Akane button and an Ukyo button, and you can talk to either of them, and they have unique dialogue for every screen. And sometimes you'll just examine something, and the three of them will talk together. And just it's just a fun little thing. You're just going around town interacting with stuff. And that's the whole game. It's it's what the Game Boy game was trying to do, maybe, but succeeding at it. Because now I wasn't playing, but like, I really wish I could. Because there are so many things where I'm like, please examine this thing. Please talk to Ukyo on that screen. I want to know what she has to say about this.
Yeah.
That, like, the player didn't always do. And I'm just like, I wish I could because this seems so much fun. This is what I wanted. You were going around town just interacting with stuff and having funny exchanges, and that's the whole game. There's not a lot of puzzles. It's mostly just it's the same as before. It's mostly just finding the correct order to do things. Like eventually Nabiki will show up on this screen and you can talk to her and silly shenanigans happen, but she won't appear until you hit a trigger point somewhere. It's the same gameplay, but it's a lot more fun because the writers are clearly having fun with it. The
Yeah.
writers clearly love these characters and they just want an excuse to be like, we like Ukyo. We want Ukyo around. We want to see what Ukyo has to say in these situations. And that's just infinitely better. It's exactly what I wanted out of a like Ranma simulator. And I think that that's more accurate to the show than just like a fighting game.
Yeah.
And then finally, the best part is the third party member, which is Ryoga's dog.
That's so
Ryoga's
funny.
dog, who appeared in one storyline of the manga that did not get adapted into the anime. So that's how you know this was made by a real fan.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the dog didn't even get featured in the anime version. But here's Ryoga's dog. And of course, you get goofy jokes of like, you can talk to the dog and it will have different variations of barking and what whimpering. And it even has a subplot because in that original storyline from the manga, the whole plot is that Ryoga's dog had puppies. So he's invited to, like, hey, son, come back home since you're constantly lost and it's been ages since you came home.
Hmm.
And Ryogo's like, okay. And then this becomes an excuse to have like a house date with Akane. Because he's like, do you want to see the new puppies? And she's like, yeah. And then Ryogo's trying to have a nice date with Akane, but Ranma is being a jealous jerk and interfering with that. And that's the whole hijinks. So establish Ryoga's dog had puppies. In this, it's an original storyline where the puppies go missing, so that's why the dog joined your party, because now you're looking for the puppies.
Oh.
And this is just another one of the little random side quests you do as you go around town. This is the dog side quest, which of course ends with like Ryoga being like having a comical misunderstanding and you have to fight him. And then he's like, wait, the dogs are missing? I'll go look for them. And then he runs in the wrong direction, etc. But yeah, that's the excuse for why the dog tags along. And it's just adorable. But eventually they catch Hopplesai, and he does the Moxie Bustion weakness technique, and Rama's now weak. And then we cut to Act 3. Please hit the eject button on your PC 98, remove the floppy disk, flip it over to side B for Act 3, which is the actual, like, it is just the Moxie Bustion arc. It is just a pure adaptation of that one arc to serve as the finale for this game. So, I have less to say about that, but what I will say is, once again, Ranma has party members because the first like 30 or so minutes of this act is literally just like a Shenmue style like walk and talk of like well Rama has to actually go to the mountains. They don't just cut to him in the mountains like in the original source material. He has to walk there and he's got his dad and Ukyo in the party to just talk. And you're just walking in the woods and it's like, oh, we're getting tired. Let's start a fire. Oh, dad's trying to catch a fish, etc. Just silly little moments that don't progress the plot at all. But whoever wrote this decided, yeah, let's have some more fun. Let's just have Ranma hanging out with Ukyo and his dad while they hike through the mountains before the plot continues. This is the stuff that the original source material skipped over, but the artists here wanted that. They want to see these characters interacting. It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it's an energy you don't see anymore with like like anime video game adaptations. Like I feel like there was like this energy in like the 90s and aughts, occasionally at least, where like you would get video games that very much came from a place of like here's what like uh here's like the like silly side stuff fans want to see. Like I think of like the Evangelion like school life or games or whatever they're called.
Oh yeah, those.
Those feel like they come from a similar place, even though I hear they're not very good.
Yeah, the biggest comparison I can think of is the Game Boy Advance Dragon Ball RPGs.
Yeah, those I see what you mean there. Yeah,
Yeah, because you mentioned at the start that they made RPGs for Dragon Ball. They made RPGs for a bunch of anime, but they're mostly just like straight adaptations. Like they made a bunch of RPGs that is just Goku fighting Frieza and all that. And the Game Boy Advance games were the same, but they had a bunch of fun, goofy interactions where you just go around the map doing stuff. And like, yeah, that's definitely a very different energy you don't really see a lot of. Even in this era, most Rama games didn't do what I'm describing. It's just this one.
yeah,
And that's why to me it feels like a fan game. Because even back then, this isn't what a lot of official games were doing. It's just, hey, Ukyo's a fun character. She deserves more screen time, so let's give her some. Instead of just instantly cutting to Ranma at the camp with his dad and Ukyo, let's just actually show them walking to the camp and getting like 30 minutes of interaction, just talking about what's happening and getting to see their character interactions. That's fun.
yeah,
And yeah, that's absolutely not what most games do, but I think that's what most fans would enjoy and want, even if they don't know that that's what they want. That's probably what they want.
yeah, for sure.
So, that part is cute, but then after that point, then it just becomes a straight adaptation of the Moxie Bustion arc, which is why I finished describing it because unlike the others, where it's just again in the Game Boy game, it's just and then Ranma went to the mountains to train and he learned a new move and then he came back. Like it that part gets skipped over so that we can get to the final boss with Hopplesai. But because this is an adventure game, it's like, no, every individual scene is following the adventure game structure. You have to talk to the characters, you have to actually select, like, move, make Ranma go in the spiral, and then he gets yelled at because he did it wrong. So select it again, and little by little, he gets better. And act out the whole sequence. It is a role playing adventure game. You are doing the stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but it is just the same story, so there's less stuff to stay there past the little Shenmue sequence. But it does end with the Hopplesai fight, and they properly animated because it's the big finale. After you beat the final boss, you get a proper animated cutscene which adapts the ending. And again, the whole sequence of everyone pieces back the papers for Ranma. It's a good ending note. It's a very straightforward story, and it's like, oh, all the characters you met along the way helped you for this one moment. And it's a nice happy ending where Ranma gets to, hug Akane and everyone's happily ever after. And Happosai got his comeuppance. And they have a nice little, like, it plays the MIDI version of the theme from the anime. And it just has a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, that it definitely sounds like the best game we've discussed here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best games. The things holding it back, I'd say, are just the fact that, like, at the end of the day, it is still just like a point and click pixel hunt of you just gotta find the correct sequence to do things. Um, Definitely not all of the dialogue is worthwhile, because again, Ryoga's dog is just a dog. You can talk to it, but most of the time it's just, yeah, it's a dog. Most of the time, Akane's dialogue is just like, we gotta find Hopplesai. We have to do the thing. I am here to remind you what your last objective was. And not a lot, but still, the few golden nuggets of like fun interaction are absolutely worth it. It's just a cute, fun experience. And if you pirate it, you get to see naked Ranma, so there's a little bit of everything for everyone. And yeah, those are the three games that adapt this one storyline so we can compare and contrast them and see which one do you think is better? Was it the Mega Man game?
It doesn't, I haven't played them myself, so it's hard for me to judge personally, but kind of seems like it was not the Mega Man one for Game Boy.
I also love calling it that despite the fact that like it's just like it again in the playthrough I showed you, it's like 5 minutes,
Yeah,
but I got stuck there for 30 minutes. And even then, it's just one sequence out of like a 2-hour game. And yet it's the one thing I can refer to it as. That's what the game is now. But yeah, those are some games. Hopefully you've now gotten a taste of what to expect of other Ranma games, even if I don't have time to cover all of them. Because again, we started with a pseudo fighting game, we got a weird game, and we got an adventure game. And I feel like every Ranma game fits into at least one of those three categories.
mm.
So yeah, just in case anyone's curious, aside from the MSX game, most of these games were pretty easy to emulate. It's just a matter of, well, some of them you need to be able to speak Japanese, but hey, if I could do it, so can you. I'm not suggesting you do. I don't think anyone should play through that Mega Man maze, but if you want to, it's very easy to do. So who knows? Maybe I will expose people to some of the weirdness of this series that cannot be conveyed through just explaining it. But for now, I suppose we can call it there. Do you have anything you'd like to promote
Uh,
before we sign off?
Not at the moment. You cannot find me anywhere, but oh well, the other place actually the one place you can find me is on another podcast that I guest on occasionally called Battle of the Blorbos. Uh,
You're
it
on that too?
Yeah. Uh, it's a podcast where we rank all fictional characters ever. based on arbitrary and goofy criteria.
I'm still upset that like last time I didn't realize until the very end of the recording. I'm like, oh my god, this is why M specifically requested I talk about weirdos. Is because they're Blorbos. I could have been making Blorbo jokes the whole time. But yeah, uh, that is a good place where people can find you. Battle of the Blorbos for the like two people listening to this who are not already aware of that podcast. But yeah, this has been fun. I hope you enjoyed learning about some of these games.
Yeah,
And yeah, well everyone have fun and do not pirate Ranma games or you will find some big surprises maybe. Have
yeah.
fun.